Whitetail Woods by RagingSemi. Applebloom, Sweetie Belle, and Scootaloo were exploring the Whitetail Woods, hunting for the cutie marks. They hadn't found any, but they did find lots of neat stuff. The stream that poured through the woods was laden with gooey frogs' eggs stuck to the rocks. They had found an old robin's nest, built and hidden close to the ground. It still had broken eggshells in it. They were the prettiest shade of blue any of them had ever seen. They found an old and antique typewriter half buried in the mud. None of them could come up with an explanation for how it had gotten there. The neatest thing of all was an old toy boat, carved from a single piece of wood. It looked like an old-fashioned paddle-wheel steamer. Some fool must have been playing with it upstream and it had gotten swept away. They all felt sad for the fool, whoever it was. The discussion soon turned to who would get to keep the boat, and that resulted in an argument. The heavy fall rains were mostly over, and now the weather was cold and dry. Puffballs had swelled under the leaves from the rain, and now had also dried out. All the fillies laughed as these puffballs would explode underneath their hooves, creating a puff of spores. Most of the leaves had fallen from the trees, but there was still plenty of color. Red, yellow, and brown covered the forest floor in a blanket, and the cold blue sky hung up above. A few leaves left on the trees were brittle and rattled when the breeze flew. Darkness came early this time of the year, so the fillies made a point of heading home before it got late. They were having a sleepover at Applebloom house tonight, and they swung back around the arm of white-tailed woods that stretched out onto the Sweet Apple Acres property. As they crested a hill, they began to smell smoke. It wasn't a bitter, acrid smell, but almost sweet and comforting. They found Granny Smith at the edge of the woods. She was burning trash. It was mostly farm debris, more fallen apple tree branches than anything else. That explained the pleasant smell. There was an old fire pit out there. Twice a year in fall and spring, Granny still hauled out a load to burn. She didn't do much farm work anymore, as she was slowing down, but she insisted on doing this. She wasn't just here to burn refuse. She was roasting a fat sausage over the fire, and had a jug of cider with her.
Hi, Granny.
Hi, Granny Smith. Hi, Smith. Hello.
The fillies called.
Oh, hello, girls.
Granny Smith called back.
What are you up to today?
We're looking for our cutie marks,
Said Applebloom.
Yeah!
Said Scootaloo.
Oh, now isn't that sweet? Little fillies looking for their cutie marks.
Granny Smith said.
That sure brings back the memories. I can remember when I got my cutie mark. Those days were filled with sunshine and moon pies and chasing after fireflies and...
How did you get your cutie mark?
Sweetie Belle asked.
Can't you tell, silly?
Scootaloo scolded.
She got it from baking apple pies.
Yeah,
Said Applebloom.
my granny makes the best apple pies in all of Equestria.
Oh, bless your heart, girls, but I didn't learn the secret family recipe until a long time after I got my cutie mark. It's a special secret, and is only passed down from the oldest mare to the youngest mare. I'll probably teach Applejack soon enough. I had already foaled your mother, Applebloom, before my own grandmother taught me the recipe. No, I got my cutie mark for a different reason.
Will you tell us, Mrs. Smith?
Sweetie Belle asked.
Yeah?
Said Scootaloo.
Oh, please.
Said Applebloom.
Nah. Ain't no story for young ears.
You're not going to tell us?
Applebloom asked, putting on a long face.
I won't tell you how I got my cutie mark,
Granny Smith said.
but I can tell you about the time my best friend got her cutie mark.
The three fillies looked up expectantly.
At least, if you want to hear a spooky story.
Granny Smith added. That got the hook into them. They all started jumping up and down.
Oh, please tell us.
Please tell us.
They all said at once.
Okay, I'll tell you. You better get some eats into you. I got a whole package over in that there saddlebag in the cart.
She pointed.
Better sharpen some sticks. Oh, and I've got plenty of cider for everyone. But I've only got the 1 cup, so I have to share that.
She reached down below her old wooden folding chair and grabbed a hip flash. She poured a bit into an old tin cup.
Can't tell a story without a nip of Applejack.
The old pony said. Sweetie Belle looked shocked. Scootaloo grinned. Applebloom said,
Granny, we can't have any Applejack. We're just fillies.
Nonsense, child.
Granny said.
It's just a teaspoon. You won't even feel a thing. It's good for you. Keeps out the chills. You can catch pneumonia on a cold day like this.
Applejack ain't gonna be happy.
Applebloom said.
Well then, you better not tell her, or anybody else.
Granny Smith said.
Besides, it's not like I didn't give her a nipper or two when she was your age. So what were we... Oh, right.
Granny Smith got on with it.
I was just a little filly back then, your own age. I wasn't Granny Smith back then, just Pomegranate Orchards. That being my maiden name, you understand. Did you know that pomegranate means apple grenade in French? I used to think that was so fancy when I was little. Anyway, I used to have a friend. She was my best friend in the whole world. Harmony Blossom was her name. She was a small thing, smaller than me, even though we was the same age. She was real quiet and shy-like.
You mean like Sweetie Belle?
Scootaloo elbowed her friend.
Kind of. I was thinking more like Applejack's Pegasus friends, Fred or something.
Fluttershy!
The fillies all said at once.
Right.
Said Granny.
She could barely talk to grown-ups or strangers without squeaking. Oh, but still waters run deep. Once you got to know her, got through that shell, she was a real character. We spent that whole summer together, me and her. School was out, so near every hour we were together. She'd spend one night at my house, and then I'd spend the next at hers. In the morning, we would get up early, just so we could do our chores early. We'd help each other mow the lawn or whatever, and then it would be off for a full day of play. We did all sorts of things. Go swimming and diving down at the pixie pool. I could dive like a champion in those days. Or we'd go see the picture shows for a nickel, or make lemonade and earn a few nickels selling it. Or we'd go to the fair and ride the rides. Oh, talk about colts.
The fillies giggled.
We were closer than sisters. Something about being that age, you make the best friends you'll ever have in your life. I can't explain it.
The 3 little fillies understood perfectly well.
Well, that was the year the butcher came to Ponyville.
Granny Smith said.
Wait a minute.
Interrupted Scootaloo.
Do you mean the butcher? The equestrian butcher?
Land sakes, child.
Granny said.
How do you know about him? That was a long time ago.
Sometimes on the weekends, I stay with my daddy in Cloudsdale.
Scootaloo said.
He's a police pony. He's got all sorts of books about famous criminals.
Who's the butcher?
Sweetie Belle asked.
He's a famous murderer pony.
Sweetie Belle asked.
Where?
And
Oh, Scootaloo.
Scootaloo said, lowering his voice as if she got in trouble if an adult hurt her.
He killed a bunch of ponies a long time ago. He didn't even steal their money. He just liked to kill ponies. He's real famous.
Infamous, you mean?
Granny Smith said.
And he did worse than that.
What could be worse than murder?
Sweetie Belle asked. Granny ignored the question.
I wonder what the cutie mark would be on a pony like that.
Nah, knives.
Applebloom said. Granny answered briskly. That caught the fillies off guard.
Well, if he had a cue mark like that.
Applebloom giggled, just a bit nervously.
You'd think they'd have known he was a bad pony.
Applebloom.
Granny Smith scolded.
Don't you have more sense? Lots of nice ponies have knives in their cutie marks. Your own granddaddy did. He was a butcher. Not a killer, just a butcher. It tans my hide. Butchering is a fine profession. It takes talent and skill and artistry. It's a noble blue-collar trade. It tans my hide when people use butchering as a euphemism for killing. And besides, lots of other ponies have knives in their cutie marks, like fancy chefs and even blade makers. They're a very important tool. And then there's that nice little colt with scissors on his flank that Applebloom likes to play with. Snaps.
Ew.
Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo exclaimed.
I don't like him, Granny.
Applebloom said.
He's a gross little goblin.
Granny chuckled.
Well, in a few years, things will get ironed and evened out.
Can you tell us the rest of the story?
Scootaloo asked.
Well, sure, Scootaloo.
Granny said.
Where was... Ah, the butcher. They didn't call him the butcher back in those days. That was the newspapers and books and picture shows that did that. We didn't have a name for him. In fact, the grown-ups didn't tell us about him at all. Well, not directly, anyways. They told us that a bad pony had come to town. Was some kind of drifter. Probably homeless and living in a ditch or under a bridge or something. I kind of pictured him as a big giant fella with a hunchback and a black cloak. That's the thing. They never told us just what he looked like. Or maybe they didn't know it themselves. So we ended up using our imaginations. They told us that if we saw anybody suspicious lurking around, we should run and tell a grown-up. They said we shouldn't go any deserted places by ourselves. That was just asking for trouble. They were real patronizing about it, too, talking down to us like we weren't big ponies. Oh, I remember that making me so mad. So we ended up inventing our own stories. Our imaginations went wild. We ended up scaring ourselves, like ghost stories around a campfire. That spook had killed 100 ponies and stuffed them down the well. He kidnapped foals and did horrible things to 'em before eating them up. Or he would get you and take you back to his hideout. And then he would cut bits of pieces off of you and send them back to your parents in the mail, so they could know where you were and what was happening to you. We thought it was all some sort of game. We really should have known better. Anyway, one day, Pomegranate and Harmony woke up early, or at least early by the standards of most foals on summer vacation. They had a quick breakfast, then set to work right away on Harmony's chores. Pomegranate liked Harmony's house better than her own. It was in town, which meant that it was real close to everything. It wasn't like living out in the country where you were in for a real hike if you wanted to go anywhere. There were also less chores to do in town than on the farm. It wasn't long before they had the lawn mowed, the hedges trimmed, and the front way swept. Then they set off in search of adventure. Adventure wasn't easy to find. It wasn't even noon, and it was hot and muggy. The summer solstice celebrations were long over. The Thief of Nagdad was playing at the matinee, but they had both seen it a dozen times. The carnival wouldn't be in town for another week. They could go swimming at the Pixie Pond, or even further upstream at the Whirlpool, but both places had been overrun in recent days by older foals who were always smoking or making out, and they were always such a nuisance. So they found themselves sitting on a park bench with nothing to do. Oh, okay. We could go down to the dump and shoot at rats with my slingshot, Pomegranate said.
Nah.
Said Harmony. We could fix that treehouse that fell apart, Harmony said.
Nah.
Oh, said Pomegranate. We could go to the matinee anyway and shoot spitwads off the balcony, Pomegranate said.
Nah.
Said Harmony.
This is frustrating. We can't think of anything. Maybe we should split up and each look for something fun to do.
Well, we're not supposed to go around town by ourselves. That pervert is still out there, Pomegranate said.
Oh, yeah.
Harmony said. They both sat and thought.
You know what we could do? Instead of waiting around for that guy to full nap somebody, maybe we should go looking for him.
That's dumb, Pomegranate said.
Why? If we can go anywhere we want, as long as there's two of us, then we can go anywhere he can go. If he grabs one of us, the other can go for help. If we find that where he's been camping, then the grown-ups can catch him and we won't have to worry about him anymore. And we'd be heroes. They'd give us the key to the city. They might even have a parade.
I'd like to see a parade, Pomegranate said.
You wouldn't just see it. You'd be in it. You'd be the maid of honor, or whatever it's called. You'd ride next to Princess Celestia in her open carriage, and you'd get pulled by 6 of her big stallion guards.
Let's do it, Pomegranate said, finally sold. So they set to work. They didn't actually expect to find the monster or to put themselves in any danger. It was just a new game, a welcome distraction on a slow, muggy summer day. They started in the town's central park, looking under benches, gazebos, and shrubs. They found nothing suspicious. They did, however, run into a couple of fillies from school, Black Forest Cake and Emerald Tiara. Harmony and Pomegranate told them of their plans, and the 2 new fillies were eager to join in on the fun. They soon finished scouring the park and moved on to places like the alleyways in the town center and the little copse of woods behind the general store. They ran into more foals, and then more. Each was eager to join in on the game. It was fun, and the thought of fighting against the fear that had been troubling their summer was a true adventure. By mid-afternoon, every foal in Ponyville and most of the outlying farm community had joined the group. They had a whole army of foals. Adults saw them go by, of course. They couldn't help but see them go by. It was like a stampede. But the foals were clearly having fun, so they didn't try to stop them or ask what they were doing. They had searched all of Ponyville. They had gone out to the swimming holes and hassled the older foals, some of whom ended up participating in the search. They searched under bridges, inside culverts, in ravines, the other 2 parks in Ponyville, and anywhere else they could think of. When supper time came around, they simply rotated out. Some had supper at 5, others 5:30, and others still at 6. They rushed straight back to the army as soon as they could gobble down their food. There was never a time that the army hadn't been at least a couple dozen foals strong. The search went well into the long summer evening. This time of year, foals were allowed to play outdoors until the last bit of sun was gone, and this time of year the twilight could last for an hour or more. The sky slowly faded from a light blue to a darker blue to a pretty sort of blue-green, then increasingly darker shades of blue as the twilight wore on. The army began to diminish. One by one, starting with the youngest, the foals started going home for bed. They usually left as the army passed by their own homes. Emerald Tiara and Black Forest Cake were among the last to leave. Then it was just Pomegranate and Harmony. They had already had quite a day. They had just led every foal in town in what was perhaps the biggest game any of them had played all summer. Now they were alone, and it was truly dark. The feeling of invincibility from earlier in the day was gone. It was replaced by a less pleasant feeling. They had a feeling like they were being watched. A sinister, palpable feeling. It was as if a pony was breathing down their necks, but they couldn't see anybody, no matter which direction they turned. The feeling of unease only grew as they tried to convince themselves that it wasn't real. They hurried back to Pomegranate's farmhouse at a canter. Normally, Harmony would have just stayed the night at Pomegranate's, but tonight she didn't want to. They had been so busy, Harmony hadn't brought any of her stuff over. "What are you talking about?" Pomegranate asked. "Forget your stuff. If you need anything, you can just borrow something of mine."
I want to go home,
Harmony said. It wasn't just a matter of her belongings. She was homesick and scared. She wanted to go home to her mother. "You silly fool, you can't go home. You know we're not supposed to go anywhere by ourselves. If you want, I can get my stuff and we can both go." Harmony took off at a gallop before Pomegranate could finish the offer. Pomegranate began to follow, but then took appraisal of the situation. There wasn't a bit of light left in the sky but stars, and they weren't much help. They barely gave a silhouette to the rustling leaves. Besides, that boogeyman the adults had warned them about was probably just imaginary. Hadn't they already searched everywhere and found nothing? Pomegranate went back inside her own house, confident that her friend Harmony would make it back home perfectly safe. Harmony found herself on the empty country road between Pomegranate's farm and Ponyville. She could have galloped the whole way home, but had slowed to a walk. The sound of shod, galloping hooves on the road was so noisy that it could have woken up the dead. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. She turned to look behind her, but there was no pony there. She kept walking. The shadows were so dark, a manticore could have hidden them and she wouldn't have seen it. The light of the rising moon only sharpened the contrast. She looked behind her again. Still, no one was there. Wind was rustling the leaves of the poplar windbreaks that lined the road. A few bats swooped out in strange arcs, catching bugs. She looked behind her again. A stallion was standing there, 30 yards behind her. He was huge. Harmony froze in her tracks. He could have been brown or gray, but in the moonlight he only looked black. His mane was wild and unkempt, sticking out in all directions. There was a smell to him. She could smell it from here. He smelled like he hadn't bathed in years. It was all sweat and piss and stinks she couldn't recognize. He leered at her. Hatred and violence streamed off of him. He grinned. Harmony turned and took off at a fast trot. She hadn't gone 10 paces before she turned to look again. He was gone. Harmony quickened to a canter. She kept looking to her right at the open pasture. Then she looked left at the windbreak, hoping he wasn't trying to overtake her. As she always kept looking behind her, the stallion never reappeared. She was beginning to think that the stallion had gone for food, or had even been a figment of her scared imagination. She should just concentrate on getting home. She focused on the road ahead of her, trying to see through the darkness. He was in front of her, perhaps 20 yards away. She turned and ran. She could have run all the way back to Pomegranate's house, but instead, for some reason, she turned right, onto Alm Hill Road. I don't know why she turned onto that road. Perhaps she thought the butcher wouldn't follow her up that hill. Maybe he knew that the only thing on that road was that house, and that would scare him away. What? Harmony galloped all the way up that...
What?
Huh?
Granny Smith asked.
What house?
Scootaloo asked.
What's wrong with Alm Hill Road? I know a filly who lives out there.
Oh.
Granny said, blinking.
Are you telling me you don't know about the house on Alm Hill Road?
Scootaloo shook her head.
None of you fillies know the story about the ghost of Alm Hill Road?
All three shook their heads, their eyes still wide from the story.
Land's sake, I didn't think foals would ever stop telling that story. I suppose I'll have to back up a bit. The ghost on Alm Hill Road was once a little filly without a cutie mark, just like you three. Or Harmony Blossom, just like in this here story. Only she goes back a lot longer than that. Maybe all the way back to Ponyville's founding. She was named Ginger Bonnet. Her family had a homestead out on what's now Alm Hill. There weren't nothing back then, and I can't say back when exactly, 'cause I don't rightly know. My own mother told me the story of the ghost of Ginger Bonnet, and I must go back further than her. All I know about her was that she spent all her days trying to get a cutie mark, kinda like you three. Anyway, one day, when Ginger Bonnet was just a little filly, her parents abandoned her.
What?
Asked Sweetie Belle.
They abandoned her at home.
You mean they just left her and never came back?
Asked Scootaloo.
Yep.
Gosh.
Said Applebloom.
Mm-hmm.
Continued Granny.
I don't know why they did it. I heard different stories. Some said it was because Ginger Bonnet was so naughty that they got sick of her and left. I don't believe that one. Others said that her parents were a couple of drunken louts and left her for a new life because they were so greedy and inconsiderate. I find that one a little more likely to believe. Whatever the reason, Ginger Bonnet was left all alone. They say she cried for a whole week. She could have gone into town and told somebody, but she knew they would put her in an orphanage somewhere. She didn't want to go to no orphanage. She always thought her parents would come back. She waited and waited. She didn't do the farm work. She couldn't have, even if she tried. She was such a little filly. So when that fall came around, she didn't have enough food to last. She started getting hungry. She didn't even have enough to get to winter. It was about this time of year that she ran out of food completely. But she still didn't go into town for help. She just kept getting weaker and weaker. She was all hide and bones. Then one day, she got dizzy. She fell down the stairs.
The three fillies gasped. Granny continued.
She broke her legs, or maybe her hip. Nobody knows. But she couldn't get back up. She was too hurt and too weak. So she died there, at the bottom of the stairs. Died of thirst. It was 2 or 3 days later. She had spent that whole time there on the floor, waiting for somebody to help. Waiting for her parents to get home. Somebody found her body, I don't know who. Some stories say the schoolmarm, others the preacher. The stories are different on that, but they're all the same on what she became.
Granny took a long draught of his cider. The fillies waited patiently.
Do you fillies know what a hungry ghost is?
She asked. They shook their heads again.
Oh, a hungry ghost is a wretched thing. It's the worst sort of ghost that there is. They've got long, spindly legs, all broken and twisted in Ginger Bonnet's case, and they've got big, round, bloated bellies from starvation. They've got a long, skinny neck with the hide falling right off, and they've got tiny, shriveled up mouths that they can never fill. They're full of rage for the living, and they always desire the things they couldn't have in life.
Food?
Asked Scootaloo.
Is a hungry ghost what happens when a pony dies of starvation?
No,
Granny said.
it's more than that. A hungry ghost always searches the earth for her heart's desire. Ginger Bonnet died from lack of food and water, but there were 2 things she always wanted more. First, she wanted a cutie mark, and second, she wanted to be loved. She was very lonely once her parents left. And that was the story of Ginger Bonnet. Her ghost lurked there in that old house. We were warned to stay away when we were fillies. We didn't even go down Elm Hill Road. I saw it once getting close on a dare. It was sandwiched in between 2 chestnut trees. They must have been planted when Ginger Bonnet was a filly, but over the years had grown huge and actually started growing into the house. The house was all squished up like between those trees, and there was blackberry briars growing up all around the place. You could tell it was haunted just by looking at it. Oh, just the thought still gives me the shivers.
What about Harmony Blossom?
Asked Sweetie Belle.
Right.
Said Granny.
Harmony galloped as hard as she could up Elm Hill. She looked back, and this time she did still see that horrible stallion coming after her. He was only cantering, but still keeping up with her. She thought she saw a grin on his face. Harmony crested the hill and started coming down the other side. There was the Bonnet house. She could barely make out its form in the moon shadow beneath the chestnut trees. She ran up to the front door, treading lightly on the porch for fear of it falling in. The door only hung from one hinge. She pushed past it. It creaked loudly, and paint chips fell from its surface. There was a staircase on her left, and a broom closet on her right. On the wall before her, the entrance to the kitchen was off-center to the left. Before it, on the floor, was a hole where the cast-iron wood stove had crashed through many years before. Harmony dove into the closet, shut the door, and tried to make herself as small as possible. There was a small metal grill at the bottom of the closet door for ventilation. It was just enough to peer through. Harmony did so, no matter how scared she was. The moon was still low enough on the horizon that its light poured through the broken windows, illuminating the interior with gloom. The horrible stallion came. There was a loud crash as he stepped through the porch. He simply walked through the rotted wood as if it were a bank of snow. He shoved the door, and it fell with another crash. He entered the front room and looked around, squinting in the poor light. Harmony could hear him chuckling softly. He went upstairs first, searching every room. The clopping of his hooves sounded like thunder. Harmony was shivering and shaking all over. She thought to escape then, while he was upstairs, but he would hear her. Then he would be after her, and there would be nowhere left to run to, so she stayed put. He came back down the stairs. He took one step at a time, as if to taunt her. He searched the kitchen next. She could hear him tearing the doors off of cabinets. He came back out of the kitchen. There was a look of insane rage on his face. Then he slowly looked to his left, saw the closet, and grinned. He was looking straight at her through the same grill. He stepped forward. That was when he heard it. They both heard it. It was the clop of a hoof on the floor above. The stallion chuckled and turned his head up to look at the ceiling. He tilted it in a disconcerting manner. It was cold enough that Harmony could see his breath billowing out of his snout in a great cloud. Odd for a midsummer's night. There was another clop, and another. The stallion's smile fell. This wasn't a filly trying to hide. In fact, he had already searched upstairs and found nobody. The walking continued. It didn't sound like a natural pony at all. It sort of shuffled and shambled across the upper floor. It started to come down the stairs. Harmony couldn't even shiver anymore. She knew what it was. The stallion didn't. Still, he started to back up into the kitchen, his nostrils flaring. Eyes. There were eyes coming down the staircase. Great green eyes. They glowed, only the irises were visible. The pupils within were totally dark. Harmony had never seen such blackness. The eyes reached the bottom of the steps, then turned. They faced the stallion and came forward. The shuffling clopping of hooves resumed, but the eyes didn't bob up and down like those on a living, walking pony. There were no hooves. There was no body, only the eyes, floating at an even level. The stallion retreated into the kitchen. The eyes flowed. There was a scream, a horrible, blood-curdling scream that tore through the whole house. A stallion's scream. There was a great thrashing and clashing of hooves on wood. The whole kitchen must have been torn to pieces. It felt to Harmony as if it went on for hours. She curled herself tighter and tighter into a ball. The screaming turned to a gurgling, and slowly it diminished. There was only heavy breathing, and then that too stopped. Then there was a horrible new sound, a combination of eating, drinking, and slurping. And finally, there was silence. The eyes returned. They passed through the living room on the way back to the staircase, but they stopped in the middle of the room. They turned to look at the closet. They were perfect circles. The closet door swung open by itself. Harmony stood up to face it, having no way of hiding any more. Harmony could begin to see an outline of the ghost. Its legs were almost nothing, twisted and thin, almost like dried noodles. She had an impossibly big, round belly. Her mouth was a horrible little shriveled thing. Blood dripped from it. A wave of cold washed over the house.
You don't have a cutie mark, do you?
The ghost said.
No.
Said Harmony Blossom. There was silence.
Are you Ginger Bonnet?
Asked Harmony Blossom.
Yes.
Said the ghost of Ginger Bonnet. More silence.
You seem like a nice filly.
Said the ghost of Ginger Bonnet.
Thank you.
Said Harmony Blossom.
I think we'll be the very best friends.
Said the ghost of Ginger Bonnet. Before Harmony could react, the eyes came forward. They rushed forward. They came right up to her nose, past her nose. They passed right through her. Harmony had never felt a stronger sensation of cold. Harmony panicked. She rushed headlong out of the closet, leaped over the ruined front porch, and took off across the fields, not even turning down the road, but tearing across it and beelining straight for the lights of Ponyville and her home. She only paused when she got tangled in a barbed wire fence, and only then long enough to disentangle herself. She sprinted the rest of the way home to safety.
She got her cutie mark that very night.
Granny Smith added.
It was fully formed by the time she got home. Her parents screamed when they saw it.
Applebloom, Sweetie Belle, and Scootaloo gasped, and then pleaded.
What was it? What was it? What was it? What was it?
Applebloom asked.
It was white.
Said Granny Smith.
A white what?
Sweetie Belle asked.
Just white. Everywhere. Over her whole body. Every single hair on her coat, mane, and tail had turned stark white. Her parents dyed her that very night. But all the folks could tell when she went back to school in the fall. It was a pretty bad dye job.
That doesn't make any sense.
Said Scootaloo.
Cutie marks are supposed to be a thing, and they're supposed to be on her flank.
Oh, there was a mark on her flank, too.
Granny said. Took the last bite of sausage and drank the last gulp of cider. Last morsels were always reserved for the storyteller, just like the warmest spot by the fire. She pretended to just now notice them looking at her expectantly.
It was black.
She added.
Some kind of black spot, I guess you could say. I would say it was a circle, although now that I think about it, that's not quite right. Maybe it was oval, or even kidney-shaped. In fact, I don't recollect it having one shape or another, depending on when you looked at it. Like I said, it was black, the darkest black I'd ever seen. The edges were funny, the way light just sort of faded out. You couldn't even see the hairs in the middle. It was like looking into a hole, or maybe a window, looking out into something beyond. And that's the story of Harmony Blossom's Cutie Mark.
Granny Smith concluded. The three fillies blinked, lost in thought.
I saw her once.
Granny Smith added.
Ginger Bonnet, I mean. It was the first time I was over at Harmony's house after that night. Her parents invited me special, thought I could cheer her up. We stayed up late into the night, and that's how I know all this. She told me, scared my horseshoes clean off. She told me what her cutie mark had meant. Ginger Bonnet had left the house. Ginger Bonnet was inside of Harmony Blossom. She would always be with her. She had finally found somebody to be with. Then she told me she had something to show me. She turned off all the lights. She stuffed a blanket under the door so no light would come through. Then she threw another blanket over the curtains because a bit of light was still getting through. It was absolute darkness in that room. I couldn't see my hoof in front of my face. She asked me to look at her cutie mark then. I almost laughed. There was no way I could see anything in the pitch black. But when I turned to look, I could see the cutie mark. It was blacker than pitch black. So I got closer, and there was something inside the cutie mark. It was a spot. It glowed green. It grew and then divided in two. They were eyes, two green eyes, and they were getting closer, getting larger and larger. I jumped up then and rushed to the door and turned the lights back on. I turned back and Harmony was just standing there looking ashamed like. She had tears in her eyes. I asked her what she was thinking, but she wouldn't tell me. We never talked about any of it again. I got my own cutie mark this here pie later that school year. We stayed friends, me and Harmony, but not like we used to be. That was also the last night I stayed at her house. I guess that's all I have to say about that.
She wrapped up for the last time.
But whatever happened to her?
Sweetie Belle asked.
Who?
Asked Granny Smith.
Harmony Blossom.
She grew up, same as the rest of us. She moved to Canterlot and married a nice rich lawyer. We kept in touch. She just passed away a few years ago. Probably didn't have to dye her coat anymore those last few years. Her son's family still sends me a card come holiday season. Nice family, them.
What about the butcher?
Applebloom asked.
Disappeared. Never seen or heard from again. The crime stopped. That was a part of the big mystery and why he was so famous. Infamous, I mean.
What about that house?
Scootaloo asked, a mischievous grin on her face.
Gone completely. Blew down in the winter of 91, if I'm not mistaken.
Scootaloo looked disappointed.
I doubt it was haunted anymore anyways.
Granny Smith added. With the story over, Granny began to get the fillies ready to go. The story had gone on too long. The sun was going down and it would be dark soon. Phyllis offered to pull Granny's cart for her. She finally agreed after a bit of protesting. She would have to stay behind and tend the last of the embers. She cheerfully sent the fillies home. They were all waves and smiles. She would be seeing them back at the farm soon enough. She had at least given them something to think about. The first stars started to come out. The wind rattled the last leaves of the white-tailed woods.
Those seem like very nice fillies,
Said a voice.
They are nice fillies.
Granny Smith added.
But you leave them alone, do you hear me?
There was no response.
Do you hear me, Ginger Bonnet? You leave them fillies alone!
Only a cold wind blew. The end.